All right. Welcome, everyone, to the People Strategy Forum podcast. So, we're a show that guides leaders on how to elevate the workforce. And we believe that people are at the heart of successful organizations. A team member's well being, rewards, career development, it's all essential to having a healthy, happy, and highly productive workforce. So, this show discusses the practical and effective leadership strategies for top executives, senior professionals, and talent managers. So, first, I'd like to introduce you to our hosts that we have today. Along with myself, my name is Sam Reeve. I'm the CEO of Comp Team. I'm here with Howard Niswitz. He's a close, a friend and a colleague of mine that we've been working together for years. It's good to have you here, Howard. And then also Sumit Singla. Sumit Singla and I, we've written a book called The Workforce Experience. And Sumit is known globally as the culture guy. So I'm glad to have him here. He's a wonderful experience and brings a good light to the show. So today's focus is on retaining your best people with job clarity. It's a crucial aspect for any thriving organization. And we're honored to have Kalyn Romaine with us. She's an organizational psychologist and an executive coach who's remarkable at just making sure that people are showing up and leading their best. So she's got a great story to tell, and her journey is very important here. She's been seen as leading transformative people and culture and inclusion initiatives across the globe. So she brings a wealth of experience. With an impressive portfolio that includes giants like Amazon, the Walt Disney Company, and Verizon, Kalyn's and her expertise is just unmatched. So we're very happy to have her. So get ready to be inspired by her innovative approaches and learn how you can retain your top talent through the power of job clarity. So welcome, Kalyn. So it's so nice to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you. And I'm in great company too, because you all are brilliant as well.
Thank you. So the first thing I just love to dig into is just how did you get to where you are today, and what inspired you to help the people that you help?
Yes, I am an accidental HR professional. So I did not set out to have this career. I thought I was going to be a teacher. Then I thought I was going to be a social services executive. Thought I was going to work in government. I thought I was going to be all types of things. But along the way, I kept getting assigned projects and being in these quasi or tangential HR roles and realized that I really liked it. And I decided to just continue my career there. My early start in both elementary education with a focus on special education and my time working in social services is really the catalyst to me approaching my work the way that I approach it now. So I've always approached it with an equity lens. I've always thought about system design because, again, I am used to seeing the sad side of systems or the ways that systems can fail us. So I decided to leverage that knowledge to create better systems at one of the most important aspects of anyone's life, which is their work.
So when you're mentioning systems, are we talking about the systems in process or systems in how we can track and help us
Yeah,
organize our work?
I think both. And so part of the conversation today around job architecture is both process as well as the norms, the culture norms that we have at work, because those are systems as well. And especially when we think about the compensation side of HR, that's one of the most unsexy parts of the HR world. So nobody is pushing and fighting to be in compensation, and you're definitely not pushing and fighting to do job analyses or that type of work. That is not that's not the cute part. You want to work in L&D and do coaching, and you want to be in talent acquisition and all of those amazing parts. And if you really are feeling froggy, you want to work in labor relations and all of that type of stuff. Nobody is pushing for comp. And so for me, I see that as, while it's both the least sexy, it is also the most important, because when people experience job satisfaction, it is because they are able to work in ways that are clear to them, but that also affirm who they are and who they wish to be.
So let's just talk a little bit about just in the fairness and inclusion piece that you
Yes.
were talking about. So how does job architecture help us with fairness and inclusion?
Yes. So the first thing I want to share is that most of the time, folks don't include DEI in those conversations. So DEI is usually a special wheelhouse that focuses on ERGs and affinity groups, partnerships for talent acquisition, L&D, so unconscious bias training, and maybe helping with employee experience surveys. But when we think about, again, the processes, the experiences with culture norm, that's really baked into the structure of the actual jobs. That's an org design issue. And so for me, when I'm thinking about DEI as it relates to job architecture, I have three key questions. The first is, are people working in the job to which they were hired, their actual job? So if I was hired to be the director of learning and development, am I working with tasks, task groupings? Do I have the right number of direct reports? Do I have the right level of decision making and power? Do I have the right supports needed to do that job? Or do you have me doing something some other job that may or may not be based and distorted based on your own biases, right? The second question is, am I being appropriately rated on the job to which I was hired? So this seems like common sense, but if we think about it, a lot of times the jobs we're rated on what we're assigned to do by our supervisor. That may or may not be our actual job. So in my own story, part of why I became a consultant and launched my own agency is because I was constantly working outside of my hired job. I was doing my supervisor's work, in some cases, my supervisor's work. I was working on special projects for other teams that were bringing great visibility to the people who were actually hired into that job. But I wasn't being credited for the contributions I was making. And in fact, in many cases, I was being dinged for not doing what I was assigned to do because I was doing their work. And that got me to thinking, like, wait a minute, this can't only be me that this is happening to, it has to be other people. And a lot of times in companies, again, no one wants to do job analysis. It's very boring to review job descriptions. It's very boring to do retitling, releveling. People will fight you against it. Folks have to get demoted or moved around. So nobody, it's like the ugly stepchild. Nobody wants to deal with it. And so I wanted to help people work on org design in ways that were meaningful. So then that third question is, how can we help people optimize their performance in their job? So if I have a job to do, right? You hired me into the job, so I know I'm doing that. And then you're rating my performance on those tasks and projects. But am I able to maximize and optimize who I am, who I wish to be? And this is a part of job architecture too, because some jobs by default are set with a ceiling. So if you think about certain jobs, when they're created in a company, we know the jobs that'll get us the attention we're looking for. Like that's the prized role. Everybody is vying for that job. They want that position because it has power and influence and all the things. And then we know the jobs in our department that are grunt work that pretty much, if you put there, that's like one step out the door. And so why would I push to do better in that job if I know no matter how hard I work, I'm still going to be stuck here? Versus a person who can fail forward in the prized job, because again, that has the power and the influence. So again, just thinking about clarity on where I've been placed. If I'm actually doing that job, am I being assessed appropriately and fairly for that job? And then third, am I set up to optimize my performance in a way that will make me feel fulfilled in addition to the organization benefiting?
No, I really love your perspective on this. I know, and that's one common thing that we have as HR and compensation professionals is hearing smaller companies. They often say, "Hey, well, I'm just I'm trying to compete with some of these big giants, as you
Yes.
mentioned, like the Amazons and the Apples and so forth." And so, a lot of what smaller companies do is they kind of they gift a what they say, gift a large title to a new hire,
Yes.
and then they don't realize that that is not fair or
No.
equitable, right? Yeah. So as in, like you were saying, I mean, somebody comes into they're excited. I just got this VP position at
Yes.
this company. I'm going to go in, and pretty soon they go in the organization and they find that they have one direct report that's
Exactly. They're
an
doing like
hourly worker.
coordinator level work. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. And I think that's so common because again, the system is not really set up for that type of clarity. So if you think about it in most startups, and I've had a run for about 2 years where I had mostly startup clients. And I basically ended up being the fractional CHRO because they were so slow to hire someone into that role. HR is the last area of any startup that they're going to staff, that they're going to invest in, because so much of HR, and this is on us as HR professionals, the messaging and the marketing of HR is task management, which you feel like you can outsource. So I'm just going to outsource my benefits administration. I'm just going to outsource recruiting to a staffing firm. I'm just going to outsource learning and development, just hire a couple consultants to come in and teach us things ad hoc. No, there needs to be intentionality around the design. And so if you think about it, like you said, folks level last, they title first, and then when they try to merge the two, they realize that they've set themselves up for failure. Because, and I had to tell a client this, I said, why would you make someone a VP when there's already someone who is a director? Where is that director going to go? So that's just one step in between. That means that that person is going to either constantly be fighting to be promoted or get more and more money in a director role, which is eventually going to be inequitable because they can't make more than the norms of other directors around the company, or their supervisor, the VP, is going to constantly, whether it's, consciously, maliciously, or just by default, dim their light because now I don't want to see you as competition because I could be working myself out of a job. So first of all, we want to have enough room in between the steps where people can feel comfortable growing. If it's a startup, unless you're a certain level or unless it's some super innovative product, most people are probably only going to be there like 2 to 5 years and they might move on. They might end up starting their own thing. So if you have the skips in between the levels, you set yourself up to retain. So instead of having a team where, let's say there are 8 levels in your company, where you have someone sitting at 8, 7, 5, 4, 3, and then 1, instead try to get it at 8, 6, 4, and 2. So then, or even 1, maybe starting by bringing in an intern. That way, the 2 can see, okay, I can move up to 3. And that 4 doesn't have to be threatened. The 4 can feel comfortable saying, hey, I can move up to 5 if I perform well. The 6 doesn't have to be threatened, and so on. And then from there, now you start working in the job task groupings. But like I said, most folks don't think about that because HR is not a functional area that we learn a lot about in MBA programs and business schools. It is not something that is taught often. It's not something that people do a lot of training in. How many managers do you know when they've taken new manager courses have had any modules that talked about titling, leveling, writing job descriptions? None. None. They talk about interview panels. They talk about how to write the performance appraisal based on the company standards. They talk about how to write people up. They talk about all these other areas, but those things never come up. And as a result, people stagnate and then people leave.
Yeah. Yeah. Generally, the companies don't start dealing with it until they start having problems.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then it's reactive and then it feels punitive. And I want to make a note about that because I'm happy you brought that up. When it feels punitive, now that you have issues with legal vulnerabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had to talk to some clients about that because, okay, this star player completed this very influential project. Again, it's a startup. So you can easily get the CEO's ear, right? So this person did this project. They moved from a 4 to a 7. Okay, this other person over here, they just want to move from a 5 to a 6, and they be sitting in the same spot for like 3 years. How did the 4 get to 7 over the 5 getting to 6? What happened with that? And so when we can't answer those questions, and when we don't have a paper trail of how we've had discussions about stretch projects, growth, investment into training and development, investment into certification, it looks like we're just picking and choosing who are our favorites. And then you get into really sticky territory when we think about the identity traits. So if all those people that we let jump from 4 to 7 are men, or are people who graduated from the same college as us, or people who are from the same hometown, or people who we worked with at some, big name company, now we got a problem. And even if you didn't mean for it to look that way, the paper trail that was inadvertently created, that's what it seems to the outsider. And now that's a lawsuit and a class action one potentially at that.
You really tell the story well, because I think a lot of companies, when they hear job architecture,
Yes.
it's like, oh, another HR initiative.
Yes. Yep.
What does it mean to the business?
Yep.
And HR is not doing themselves justice in terms of telling the story of why it's important, why it's so critical. Well, the way
At
you
all.
just explained it.
And a part of why is because, if we're gonna be honest, HR doesn't know. I was talking to someone and I said, when was the earliest, and this was somebody who had been in HR for decades. I said, when is the earliest that you were formally trained in HR, like got an HR education? And they were like, I went and got something like 20 years into my career so I could get a promotion into the executive level. It's like, so that whole time you were learning on the job, which, let me be clear, there is great value in learning something by doing it. But there are also a ton of blind spots, because if you've been working for the same company or in the same industry or in the same geographic region for that whole time, you're limited to only what happens there. The way Amazon did HR is very different than the way the Walt Disney Company did HR, which is very different than the way Zapier did HR, which is very different than the city of Chicago did HR, which was different than the way the city of New York did. So me living different places, working in different industries, working in different sectors, being in different places in my own career journey, that is how I learned to develop excellence in the craft. And so if we treat HR like it's only an art and not a science, we are only re-engineering and reinforcing the dysfunction that keeps us probably one of the most hated departments in all of work. And it's so unnecessary. When you think about job architecture, even when I was researching, because this came out of a training that I did for a client. This was an all hands training where I was talking to people about job architecture at this startup and one of my favorite clients. And I thought it was awesome, first of all, that the CEO would even let me do it all hands, because she could have just said, hey, let us work with just the exec team. But the transparency of letting people know, hey, here is what goes into us picking jobs. And here is how the organization is about to shift to get us ready for that. It's titling, leveling, tracks, whether IC or people management, and growth paths. That was so eye-opening to people. The whole team, you could see it in the chat. They were like, I've never heard of this, right? And man, I've been working 20 years. This is new to me. Wait, there's a science to this? There's a method? Yeah, we're not just randomly picking things, but we don't tell people that. And some of it is because HR doesn't want people to, see what's happening behind, what is it, the Wizard of Oz's little thing. It's like, hey, we're doing these magic things and it's magic. No, it's somebody sitting back, tediously writing down all the tasks that you work on, then grouping them together, then seeing what works, what doesn't work, pricing it to how much that's worth, thinking about ROI. There's a science to this, and people should know that and feel that.
What do you think there, Sumit?
I think that's that's a great way of putting it, Kalyn, and couldn't agree more. What I see in my part of the world is that you spoke of a 4 to a 7 and a 5 to a 6. A lot of organizations don't even have the clarity of who's a 4, who's a 7. So
Yep.
it's more of a, like you said, you've got the CEO's ear, so you walk up and
Yep.
say, hey, you know what, I don't feel senior enough. And they say, fine, you get an 8% increase
Yes.
from tomorrow. You're a senior, whatever you were earlier. And that's how it works.
Yeah.
The other thing is, and again, like you rightly said, a lot of business leaders are dismissive of HR because they feel I've been dealing with people all my life. What is there to HR? And my standard usual response to them is, I've had ears, a nose, and a throat for 40 plus years. I'm not an ENT specialist. So,
Exactly.
um,
Exactly.
so I mean, I completely agree, but it can be an uphill battle. But I've got a question here.
Yes.
Do you also think HR practitioners and us HR folks, we tend to undersell ourselves by often not being able to connect business results and
Yes.
getting too lost in the HR language and just
Yes.
getting lost in our own little worlds there.
Yeah, so I want to make a note about that, and it actually ties into what you were saying before about, helping leaders understand again HR as a discipline. A discipline is a discipline just like engineering is a discipline, product management is a discipline, etc. A part of the issue is that we shy away from using HR language. So I would never try to dumb down engineering language. And there are some things that in engineering I can't dumb down. I have to call it what it is. I can't dumb down legal language. I can explain it. I can make it relatable to you, but there are certain terms that you have to call this thing what it is. I can't dumb down finance. Finance is what it is. And so the same way that we respect the expertise, the structure, and the value of finance and legal and engineering, we have to command that respect in HR. I don't dumb down language at all for any of my clients. I bring my clients up to the level of understanding that they need to have to be able to do this work even after I'm gone. So that's why when I do these trainings, I always do word association exercise. And when you hear this word, what comes to mind? No, we're going to create shared language. This is what this means. I'm going to create, even if it's just one slide in the training, here's the name of this. Here's the name of that. Here is some research. I share peer-reviewed studies with my clients. I send my clients articles. I sometimes make them do pre-work, whether it's a all hands or for executive team members. I don't play because when we continue to infantilize, especially executive level leaders about this very important aspect of their company, again, we are reinforcing the same dysfunction that keeps people flying out of the door. There is no reason why you should be a CEO or any C-level executive and you cannot tell me the 4 aspects of job architecture. You have no clue how we came up with the levels. You have no clue about the titling norms in the company. You don't understand the difference between people management and individual contributorship. Like, why don't you know these things? Who didn't tell you? And I've worked at companies where the higher the information funneled up, the more childish it became. So by the time the information reached the CEO, it was like kiddie stuff. It was like C-Spot run. You mean this person is running, multi-million dollar, multi-billion dollar companies, and you can't tell them, hey, attrition is at this level because ... Like how is this possible? There's no way that you're that childish. And so then there are times where I've had to talk to my CEO clients and say, hey, something about you is making people feel like they need to present things as immaturely as possible. So what are you communicating to your teams? And then they've had to check themselves and say, you know what? There were a couple times some years ago where they just brought me some bad news at a time where I couldn't handle it. And I think I went a little bit too far. Okay, thank you. So now we need to have a conversation to bring the executive team back to say, look, this is not like Eveline from The Wiz. I don't know why the Wizard of Oz stuff is coming up so much today, where it's like, don't bring me no bad news. Look, we're not doing that. I need all the information so that I can make good decisions. Because this is the other thing I share, especially with C-suite and definitely the CEO and founder. When it all falls down, you're going to be at fault. They're not going to ask, well, I need to speak to the senior manager of da-da-da. They don't know who that person is. They know you. They know your face. They know your brand. They know all the press releases where you're talking about how this was such a great company. And when it all goes to pot, you're going to be on the hook for this. So why don't we just reel it in? Let's all grow up real fast and think very carefully about the best way to communicate difficult information so we can do preventive work. Titling and leveling is a preventive measure. We shouldn't be hurrying up giving people 3-level promotions because they're out the door when we haven't had a structure in 5 years for a promotional process. That's the real problem. If we don't do that, we're not addressing the root cause.
Absolutely. So another thing that I see a lot with rapidly growing organizations is that the company grows faster than some of the people at the levels within it. And so how does a leader handle that issue?
Again, the preventive work of leveling and job structuring. So if we think about all the tasks that are needed, and startups are famous for this, but I'm not even going to just keep like attacking or addressing startups, because big companies are guilty of this too. We hire so fast because the ego boost of saying we needed to bring on 5,000 people. No, you didn't. You needed to bring on like 20. You know what I mean? Like, this was only going to be a temporary bump in revenue or business. This was not long term. And we see that now, ironically, even in the consulting industry. And I'm not going to call out any names because this isn't my podcast, so I'm going to respect y'all. But we see that now in the consulting industry where it's like, why would you bring on, 3,000, 15,000 people, and now you're laying off like 20% of your workforce globally and shuttering verticals? Who is doing workforce planning there? Like, this is a very important thing to think about because people are on the other side of these decisions. So I'm a strong proponent for what I call the boxes not body philosophy, so that you can honor humanity. When we think about org design and workforce planning, we need to think about boxes first based on the long-term plan for the company. This is the 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 7 year, 10 year. Along the way, scale smartly. I'll never forget, a supervisor of mine years ago told me, and whether or not this research really existed, but she said there's some research that shows that it's better for people to be slightly overworked than to hire so many people that then people are languishing after a year or two. And I've always like held on to that, because if I can keep a lean staff and perhaps either pay people overtime or spot bonuses for any extra work that they do, so that I don't have to lay off double digits of numbers later and potentially destroy my employer brand, that's smart. Then again, that temporary ego boost of saying we hired a whole bunch of people because we're booming in business, that's just not smart business. It's just not smart business. And so I think if we approach it from thinking about the boxes, what's the org structure, the org design, what is truly necessary to achieve the business's goals in this department? Okay, we need 2 of this role, 1 of this role, and we could go without this senior level person. We'll reallocate those tasks. Cool. Let's rock with that for a couple years and then see if we need to scale. If you're doubling the team year over year, so in, what is it, 3 years, you went from a team of 10 to a team of 40 and 50. Come on. That, I'm suspicious of that. Personally, I am. Because again, how sustainable is that long term? You might have people relocating their families to work at your company. You might have people who are upending their children from certain schools, rearranging childcare, rearranging their educational plans, right? That's not fair to them. And if we're not honest about that human side, it's going to end up impacting your consumer brand, because there are a lot of brands now that are tanking and struggling to find customers. They don't want to admit it, but that's happening because people did not trust them as an employer and folks don't like them.
Well put. The other thing that I just wanted to mention too, I mean, you just were speaking about making sure that we're thinking about the boxes that are required, the jobs. And then sometimes, managers will come up and they'll say, but hey, my accountant, they're going to leave if they don't get a promotion, and they're doing the job great. They deserve a promotion. The bottom line is we don't need a senior accountant. We just need an accountant.
Not only that, you're saying they deserve a promotion now because, again, you've had them working outside of their title. When I worked for the city of New York in particular, it was called working out of title, and this was grounds for a union complaint, and you would easily win. If my job title, for which I've taken a civil service exam, passed it, been awarded, this title, earned this title, if you have me working outside of that title and that particular step, so I think it was like, let's say 3 levels within it, so you might be associate staff analyst, right? ASA. If I'm an associate staff analyst 1 or 2 or 3, if I'm a 1 and you got me doing 3 tasks, I'm going straight to my union and telling them, hey, they got me working 3. Okay, thank you. Well, you need to give them 3 pay, right? So on the surface, it looks like a promotion, but you really paying me for the work that I did. So my conversation with that people manager would be, what would make this person feel like they should have a senior accountant title? Oh, well, I had them working on. Well, why did you have them working on that? Isn't that your job? Whose job is it typically? Is it yours? Is it somebody else's? Is it really supposed to be 2 accountants? And so you just had this one person doing the work of 2? Okay, well, now I got a problem with you. Now we need to have a conversation about your performance, because that is a mismanagement of your people manager tasks and responsibilities. So those types of questions, they reveal cracks in the foundation, and you can paint over it. You could put a potted plant over it so nobody sees it, but it's still there. And that's the part that I need to know about, because you're going to bump this person up to senior accountant today, and next year when Sally Sue sees that so-and-so got senior accountant because they did one little project that caught your eye, then it's like, oh, okay, well, let me hurry up and do that. People are smart. They talk. If I see, remember I said at the beginning, the cultural norms, if I see that the culture norm is just do one thing right and you get X amount of dollars, I'm going to do that. I'm not going to name the company, but there was a company I worked for. And I used to always joke and say, oh, if you want to become an executive, all you got to do is create a deck. Like, it don't matter if you actually do what's in the deck. It doesn't matter if the company needs what's in the deck. It doesn't matter if the deck produces anything that's of any quality. Just make the deck, make it real pretty, present it really well to the right executive, and you'll have a promotion like within a year. And I could name like 10 examples of where that happened. And folks used to be cracking up when I would say it, but I was dead serious. Yeah. And I'm like, I just haven't made the right deck yet. Like, okay, I'll make it to a promotion if I just make the right deck. That should never be the case. Never. That should never be the case.
It's so funny. I mean, that example. But one other thing that you mentioned that I think that is super important is that you go into organizations, like you mentioned, you speak to a manager, or you hire a manager for a manager position. Yes. And they end up delegating all of their manager duties to like a lead and so forth. And it's like, well, yes. What are you doing? You can't delegate.
Let me tell you something. Every job, I was just talking about this on my podcast. Every job I've ever worked, I promise y'all, at least 40% of the time I was doing at a minimum my supervisor's work. I promise you that is like that's how I knew I could be a consultant. Because I'm like, well, if I could do these jokers' jobs, there's no way that I can't be able to do this on my own. Like, I've been doing other people's work my whole career. And it's so, this is why it's so funny. And I say this really with no shade. It probably sounds shady, but I'm really not being shady. It's funny to me now because I would have stayed at any one of these jobs in some cases if I had just gotten a tiny bit of public recognition for the projects that I worked on. Like, if they had just been willing to say, hey, Kalyn helped me with this, and then not dinged me for not getting my work done and their work done. If they had done, I promise y'all, I would probably have stayed at one company my whole career, because it wasn't that my work wasn't fulfilling. It wasn't that I didn't like the stretch projects they had me working on. It was the fact that it became an inner conflict to be that disrespected while simultaneously being that needed with no credit.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? I mean, it's a travesty of the human condition. I mean, and people just don't say thank you.
No. and saying thank you in the ways that matter to you.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I've only had one supervisor that asked what types of recognition do you like, and then they still didn't do it, but at least they asked. And for me, it was autonomy. I know that you respect me when you leave me alone. Like, if you give me a project to work on, manage my outcomes, not my methods. I have funny methods of doing things sometimes. I don't always want to tell you my method. Sometimes I have secret friends that I don't want you to know that I have, that feed me information or feed me the stuff that I need. That's my business. Don't ask me about all of that. Don't try to hijack my little relationships. Leave me alone. Let me do my work. I promise you, if you just give me an end date, I need this on April the 9th at 5 p.m., I'm going to have it for you. But when you give me something, and then you want me to talk to you every day, and then you want to know who I talk to, and you want to know why we said this, and then you want to get on the meeting because now you want the clout, I got to get out of there. Like, I have to skedaddle fast because I can't stand it. And I think that people managers would do well to understand that. And actually, I'll say this last point with that, because now I'm thinking that is a part of leveling too. How much autonomy does this level have? And how much autonomy is this level expected to operate on? And then if you have individuals at that level that are struggling with handling autonomy or who need more facilitated guidance, how can you train and develop them to operate autonomously or have the demotion conversation if they're not ready for that? I think that ends up being, it's like an unspoken expectation, and that gets people in a lot of trouble as well.
A question: how do you avoid people feeling like, well, if I'm only doing what I was hired to do, what's in the job description, then now I'm sort of boxed in, and how do I could do more than that?
So that's a poorly written job description, right? Because again, if you think about that's why career pathways, growth pathways are a part of job architecture. Because I should know what is below performance, at performance, and exceeding expectations. So if I know exceeding is here, I can't be boxed in, because as long as I do this exceeding, that's getting me ready to go from a 3 to a 4, right? That's getting me ready to go from manager to senior manager, or senior manager to pivoting now to executive leadership as a director or as a VP. So when we don't know those things, that's where we get into trouble. And you want to review that periodically. Most companies, they reviewing job descriptions when their star player leaves, if that, or every 5 to 10 years. That's a long time, right? And people aren't doing those jobs anymore. So you just want to be, again, you want to be thoughtful. You want to do more of that preventive work. Is there a growth pathway in this job description based on what the job is expected to do in this phase of the company's growth? If not, I need to work with my HR business partner, with my compensation team, etc., to get that job description where it needs to be.
Right.
So, Kalyn, I mean, what is your thoughts? I mean, right now, I mean, the world is currently running with jobs. The organization uses jobs as the way of packaging positions together. And in the future, there's been much more talk on skill-based organizations that are bringing in or using the people in different capacities.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on where job architecture evolves in those type of organizations?
I think it sounds like a mess. I think it sounds like I think it sounds like people who are too ignorant and lazy and hesitant to do, again, that hard, unsexy work of job architecture. And so we're literally just going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Now, let me add in some qualifiers with that, because I already know people are clicking off this stream the minute I say ignorant and lazy. Those are not terminal illnesses. That's a temporary state. If I'm ignorant of something, and everybody is ignorant of something, I need to educate myself. The minute I educate myself on something, I'm no longer ignorant. The minute I choose to take consistent action, no matter how small, on something, I'm no longer lazy. So the real challenge is solve the real root problem. Why would I have an organization full of people doing any job at any time and expect to grow and scale my company? That makes no sense. Again, that's not respecting the excellence and the discipline of these various departments. If I'm an attorney, I'm not doing finance work, most likely. I went to school to learn to be an attorney. Don't have me over here writing, income statement. I'm not doing that. If I work in HR, don't come asking me to do coding. I don't work in engineering. Stop playing with me, right?
Yeah.
And if you are going to have people working on cross-functional projects, there needs to be an appropriate compensation and bonus structure for that. There needs to be appropriate rewards and recognition for that. There needs to be an appropriate growth pathway of how someone can move methodically through that path. It's still a lot of work. It's actually more work than if you would just make the job, right? And a lot of this is reactive because it's frustrating. A lot of companies are struggling to pivot in economic turmoil. And so the solution is, well, if we just get rid of that, then we'll be able to be as agile as we need. No, you won't. Because y'all can't even manage. Okay, you got 15 jobs in this organization. You can't even manage those. So now you're about to triple that and then have people just moving through. In my head, I picture, y'all know how when they show in science videos where it's like cells and stuff just like moving through. That's what I picture that as. No, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. We're not doing that.
Yeah, no, it sounds, sometimes you hear, I mean, leaders that have the best intentions, right? They says, oh, we want to squish down the organization, make it flat so we can improve communication. And then they end up destroying a lot of other things in the process, like fairness and equality and, effectiveness, so forth. So, there's a lot of pieces there. Did you come across that very often there, Kalyn?
Of course. So let me use another example. So are we going to say, you know what, let's just throw out all of the gap account practices because you know what, this is just too much. Let's just have it where anybody can approve any amount. And as long as you send us a justification after the fact, like we should be good. You going to play with your money like that? What if we said, you know what, no, we don't need a patent for that. I think we should just let people just make it, if they want to go patent it themselves, they could go do that. Like we'll figure out the legal part later. No, you would not do that for that. That wouldn't make any sense at all. You would never go like that. You would never leave those areas of your company unprotected and unstructured because you appreciate the gravity of what could happen if those things are done wrong. So why wouldn't you feel that same way about HR?
Exactly.
It's a value proposition.
That's right. So, Kalyn, I know we're coming up to the end of our time here, and it's just been an incredible conversation. Probably the best conversation I've had on this topic ever. So, really,
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, it is so fun to talk about this stuff with a real practitioner that really knows their stuff.
Thank you.
So, what is the key things that you want our leaders to take away from our discussion today?
Yeah, I think this isn't easy. So this is a quick win. Ask your HR business partners or your CHRO just for a list of the roles in each department. So not who is in a role, not if it's empty or understaffed, just the name of the jobs. And first of all, if that answer is we don't have it, ding, 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 that's a data point to start zooming in on and figuring out, okay, well, what's going on there? Because the next question is, well, how do we know that we're staffed appropriately? How do we know that people are being rewarded and recognized and paid fairly, etc.? Once you get that list, I would encourage leaders, especially if it's at the C-suite level, to circle or highlight the roles that they have never heard produce results in the company. So let's say you end up having like 100 jobs. If you have never heard of any productivity from that role, again, because you don't know who is in the role yet, it's just a role. If you've never heard of what that role does, that's an area where you can zoom in. From there, you can start to locate your own areas of ignorance and begin to build some competence and some knowledge there of like, well, what does this job do? Clearly we got it, we paying it, or at least it's on the, the budget. Why? What is it accomplishing for us? And then from there, now you can start to be thoughtful about, well, if this role produces so much for us, why is it only leveled at a 2, for example, versus this other thing that only has like a couple of responsibilities, but it's at a 5? That doesn't seem fair. So now we're starting to look at the work spread. And again, I think those two starting action items will be major aha moments for most C-suite leaders, because I don't think they realize how little they really know about their company. And that's a shame, because again, now we get to zoom in on the fact that people are involved with those roles. And when you want to understand, well, why are people not satisfied? Usually the first place that you can look is not who is the manager, do they like them? It's the job architecture, because people come to work to work.
Yeah. And the people want to get things done.
They want to get stuff
feel
done.
that's right. So, Kalyn, I know that you have written a book recently,
Yes.
Evolution to Equity. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I can. Let me pick my baby up. So this is my book. It is available on Amazon. It's called Evolution to Equity. And I call it Evolution to Equity because, again, I understand the art and science of HR and org development and DEI work. And so when we talk about equity, I know for a lot of folks that can feel like a scary word, but it really is based on 3 key systems: OD, or org development excellence, DEI structuring, and HR competence. So if you can master those 3 as a founder, you are well on your way to creating an equitable organization. So in the book, I set it up in 3 parts. It is, what does people, culture, and inclusion mean for you as an individual? So what are the forces, systems, influences that have created how you feel about HR, org development, and DEI in your mind? And then we start thinking about, well, what does it mean to have people, culture, and inclusion thrive on your executive team? So these are those C-suite roles. That's part 2 of the book. And then part 3 is thinking about, well, what does people, culture, and inclusion mean for your company as a whole? And I get very granular there. So I'm breaking down, what are all of the OD theories and frameworks which can support you with organization design and other organizational development initiatives. I break down, what are the HR functional areas, who plays nice together and are besties, which HR functional areas are frenemies. And so you have to manage those relationships to make sure that they are not undermining each other's effectiveness. Then I talk about the functional areas of DEI and what are the 4 key aspects of DEI where you can start to activate on individual projects. So again, because I get feedback and they're like, oh, is this another one of those DEI books? I'm like, no, it's really a textbook. So my goal is for founders to be able to pick up this book, not have any knowledge of HR, OD, or DEI, and be able to walk away with a game plan to get it going and sustain it in their companies.
Nice. I'm definitely looking forward to the read. Thank you so much for telling us about that.
Of course. Thank you.
So we have listeners out there that are just saying, so, geez, how do I learn more from Kalyn? I mean, I know you have your own podcast, right? Can you tell us about your podcast?
Yeah, so it's called the Dreaming Forward podcast, and I'm in season 2 now. I have monthly topics there, so it rotates like every 4 to 6 weeks. The topic for this month is resilience. I'm really excited about that one. So I'll be talking about individual, organizational, and team resilience. And then I have topics there related to ESG and workforce planning and succession planning. So the whole podcast focuses on leadership development, organizational culture change, and really just org development in general. I love it. I love running my mouth, as y'all can see. And honestly, for me, the podcast is just a fun way to talk about topics that feel taboo or unapproachable in HR. And so I want to try to make it relatable. Again, I talked about bringing people up to HR language. So I talk about the definitions of certain things, demystifying some of these concepts. So hopefully folks can go back within their companies and start having meaningful conversations about what needs to happen next. So again, it's called the Dreaming Forward podcast. It is available on both YouTube and Spotify. And if you don't remember the name, if you go to my website, godreamforward.com, it's on the insights page and you can find links to get there.
Well, thank you so much, Caitlin. It's been a pleasure talking to you today. What a great conversation.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed this so much. It's funny because compensation is, again, the area where people shy away from. So I haven't been able to have a good comp conversation in a minute. So this feels good to me.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in to the People Strategy Forum, and we look forward to hearing you next week. So take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.